The desert heat shimmered off the polished hoods of luxury vehicles as Vanessa Morgan pulled her weathered SUV into the back corner of Sterling Motors' lot in Scottsdale, Arizona. She didn't want to be seen, at least not for who she really was. Her pale pink cotton dress was simple. Her flip-flops were faded, her canvas tote slung casually over one shoulder. Everything about her appearance was intentional, unassuming, ordinary, and deliberately plain. No one knew it yet, but Vanessa had just acquired full ownership of Sterling Motors. Not just this gleaming showroom, but the entire dealership group it belonged to. She had worked for years to build her company, clawing her way through corporate barriers, often the only woman, often the only black executive, in every boardroom she entered. And now, standing in the Arizona heat, she had come to see what kind of place she was inheriting. Not through prepared tours or smiling managers. She wanted the raw truth. She wanted to see how they treated a woman who looked like she didn't belong. As she stepped into the icy chill of the showroom, the sharp contrast between the temperature and the atmosphere hit her like a wave. It wasn't just cold in temperature, it was cold in tone. Conversations at the front desk died out. 3 young employees, 2 sales consultants, and a receptionist looked her way, their eyes scanning her flip-flops, her dress, her skin. Their smirks were faint but unmistakable. "But she's just here for the AC and free water," whispered one. "She's probably lost," said another. Vanessa walked calmly past the showroom reception without flinching. The laughter behind her was low, cruel, and ignorant. She knew these kinds of places all too well. Places that smiled for high-income clients in tailored suits and turned frosty toward anyone who didn't look the part. She wasn't here to argue. Not yet. She was here to see, to remember, to observe a culture that had never been challenged. And it would all begin with a simple, quiet walk through a dealership that didn't yet realize it was walking into the storm. Vanessa moved through the showroom slowly, her eyes gliding over rows of gleaming cars, each one staged like a piece of art. But she wasn't looking at the vehicles. She was watching the people. The reception desk had gone silent, though the sneers behind her back still echoed. 2 salesmen leaned casually near a silver SUV, watching her like she was a misplaced brochure. At the far end of the room, a sharply dressed woman moved with precise steps, heels tapping against polished tile like a judge's gavel. That was Susan Miller, the showroom manager. Vanessa knew the name well. Her partners had mentioned Susan during the acquisition process. Experienced, efficient, but difficult, set in her ways. Susan saw Vanessa and immediately made a judgment. Her eyes swept Vanessa's appearance in a single clinical pass. Hair tied back, cotton dress, faded bag. Her expression barely twitched, but Vanessa caught it, that faint tightening of the jaw, that polite smile that didn't reach the eyes. As Vanessa approached the black luxury coupe in the center of the showroom, Susan stepped in like a gatekeeper. Her blazer was crisp, her clipboard held high like a shield. "Can I help you?" she asked, voice professional but cool. "We only display premium models here." The way she said premium hung in the air like a warning. Vanessa smiled politely. "I'd just like to take a look at your newest line." Susan's eyes flicked again over Vanessa's dress, her flip-flops, her bag. "Of course," she said thinly. "But I should mention, our vehicles are made to order. Clients usually have appointments and undergo a strict financial approval process. We rarely do walk-ins." Vanessa nodded, undisturbed. "That's understandable." But Susan didn't step aside. Instead, she offered a forced smile and added, "We do have a list of pre-owned vehicles available. More accessible price points. Would you like to see that?" Vanessa took the packet Susan offered, labeled clearly, "Pre-owned specials for general customers." There was no mistake in Susan's intent. The message was clear: this is where you belong. Vanessa flipped through the pages slowly. The cars were old, basic, outdated. She looked up, still composed. "These all look pretty dated," she said. "Just curious, why do you think I'd only be interested in used cars?" Susan blinked. "A crack in the facade. Just based on experience. First-time visitors often find those options more manageable." Vanessa smiled. Sometimes, what people see on the outside says more about them than it does about the person they're looking at. Susan's lips pressed into a tighter line. Behind her, the salesman chuckled quietly again. One of them muttered, "Maybe she's here to apply for a job." Vanessa heard it all. She didn't flinch. She simply stepped back toward the black coupe, the one Susan had gently, but firmly, tried to block her from. And as she reached out to trace the car's edge, Susan's voice snapped behind her, sharper this time. "Excuse me, ma'am. You may not touch the display vehicles." The room stilled. The staff turned. Vanessa turned too, slowly, deliberately. Her voice remained calm. "Then who has the authority to give permission?" Susan squared her shoulders. "I do, and I must ask you to leave if you're not a serious buyer. We have real clients to attend to." Vanessa didn't move, didn't argue. She only smiled and said one thing, one quiet sentence that shifted the entire temperature of the showroom. "Then I'd like to speak to the owner." The air in the showroom thickened. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned. "I'd like to speak to the owner." Susan blinked once, then again. Her polished composure slipped, but only slightly. "The owner isn't available," she said with rehearsed firmness. "They're extremely busy. If you have a concern, I can forward it to customer service." A tight, managerial smile followed. Dismissive, controlling, final. But Vanessa didn't leave. Instead, she reached into her canvas tote and calmly pulled out an older model phone. Her hands were steady, her expression unreadable. Then, with a voice that carried across the tile floor, she said, "No problem. I'll call the owner directly." The room froze. You could hear the tension crackle like static. Brandon, one of the sales consultants, dropped the pen he was spinning. Chloe at reception stared. Tyler turned to Susan, eyes wide. Vanessa tapped a contact and raised the phone to her ear. "Hello, Alex. I'm at the showroom. There's a customer service issue I think we should talk about. Can you come by?" She said it plainly. No drama, no boast, but the message was devastating. Susan paled. Her clipboard dipped in her hand. She tried to maintain her posture, but the room was no longer under her control. For the first time, the weight of authority shifted visibly, and everyone felt it. "Wait, she knows Alex," Chloe whispered. Brandon's smug grin evaporated. His throat tightened. Even customers, those still lingering around the edges of the confrontation, watched silently, unease written across their faces. A quiet storm was rolling in, and no one could tell just how hard it would hit. Vanessa placed the phone back in her tote and stood silently by the coupe. Susan took a step forward, her voice stiff. "You know the owner?" Vanessa didn't answer the question. Instead, she said only, "I'm sure he'll be here soon. I'll wait." No threats. No need. That calm confidence, utterly foreign in this showroom, unraveled everyone. Susan fidgeted. Chloe began straightening the front desk with trembling hands. Brandon suddenly found a deep interest in a stack of paperwork. Tyler whispered, "Do you think she's the new investor?" The rumors had swirled for weeks. Sterling Motors had been purchased. New leadership. A mystery buyer. Now panic seeped in. Vanessa stood still, like the eye of a storm. Her cotton dress and flip-flops no longer looked ordinary. They looked deliberate, intentional, and in the silence, even Susan realized what was unfolding. The doors chimed open. All heads turned. Alex Thompson entered the showroom in a crisp navy suit. His stride was confident, measured, and his eyes scanned the room until they landed on Vanessa. He broke into a warm, professional smile and called out, "Miss Morgan." Every muscle in Susan's body tensed. He walked straight to Vanessa and offered his hand with the kind of respect reserved for equals, not customers. "I'm so sorry for the delay," he said. "I came as fast as I could. Was there an issue here?" Vanessa returned the handshake and replied, "Just a little customer service experience. I thought we'd talk it through, in front of everyone." And with those words, the walls of Sterling Motors began to crumble. The weight of Vanessa's words hit like a seismic shock. "I thought we'd talk it through, in front of everyone." The smiles vanished. The whispers died. And for the first time, the Sterling Motors staff, who had laughed, mocked, and judged, began to realize just how far they had fallen. Susan's face drained of color. Her mouth opened slightly, as if to protest, but no sound came out. Her clipboard, once a symbol of command, hung limp at her side, useless now. The authority she had held so tightly had been hollow all along. Alex's demeanor shifted, subtly but unmistakably. He turned to face the employees, his tone calm but commanding. "I'd like everyone to gather in the conference room." Immediately. It wasn't a request. Brandon stiffened, jaw clenched. Chloe reached for her tablet with shaking fingers. Tyler didn't move for a moment, frozen in place like a man realizing the train he laughed at is now barreling toward him. Vanessa stood still, not triumphant but focused. Calm. She had no interest in shaming anyone. Not yet. But she would not look away. Not from what they had done. Not from who they had become. As the staff filed into the conference room, the once pristine showroom seemed to shrink in size. The glossy floor, the chrome accents, the stage perfection, it all felt paper-thin now. A hollow stage that had masked a culture of exclusion and unspoken cruelty. Inside the conference room, the air was tight. Chairs scraped. Shoes shuffled. No one spoke. Alex took his place beside Vanessa. Susan sat farthest from her, every motion stiff and restrained, like a woman bracing for a fall she couldn't stop. Her once commanding presence now flickered with anxiety. Vanessa sat at the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "My name," she began, "is Vanessa Morgan. And as of last month, I became the new owner of Sterling Motors." Gasps broke the silence. A pen clattered to the floor. Chloe's hand shot to her mouth. Brandon leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Even Tyler, silent and still, blinked like someone waking from a long, comfortable lie. Susan looked like she might faint. Vanessa continued, her voice even and unhurried. "Today, I came here not as an executive, not as your superior, but as a woman in a simple dress, driving an old SUV, just to see how I would be treated when you thought I was no one." Her gaze passed slowly from one staff member to the next. "And what I saw," she said, "was a place that has forgotten what respect looks like." Not a word was spoken in response. No one dared. She held up the packet Susan had handed her earlier. "You assumed I couldn't afford anything more than what was labeled pre-owned for general customers. You refused to let me touch a display vehicle. You whispered about me, laughed, mocked." Her voice didn't rise, but her words cut deeper than shouting ever could. "Not because I was rude, not because I was difficult, but because of what I looked like. Because I didn't walk in here wearing a brand name or carrying a designer bag. Because I didn't look the part." Susan shifted, eyes darting to the table, her jaw clenched tight. "And the worst part," Vanessa said, leaning forward, "you all believed you were being professional." The room was silent, dead silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt louder than the breathless stillness inside. Vanessa let the weight of her last sentence settle. "You believed you were being professional." That was the truth, and it stung. Not just because it exposed their behavior, but because it shattered the self-image they had clung to for years. She turned her gaze to Susan, the once proud manager, now sitting rigid and pale. "Susan," Vanessa said gently, "you've led this showroom for years. You've built numbers, efficiency, structure. But today, when I walked in, you didn't see a human being. You saw a problem to be managed, something to move along, to dismiss politely." Susan opened her mouth. I didn't know." Vanessa held up a hand. "That's the point. You didn't care to find out." Susan swallowed hard, her voice trembling. I truly apologize, Miss Morgan. I didn't recognize you." Vanessa's expression didn't change. "And if I weren't the owner, Susan, if I were just a woman in a cotton dress with no title, would I deserve any different?" The question fell like a blade. Susan's eyes welled with tears. She couldn't answer. Not truthfully. Vanessa turned her attention to the others. "Brandon," she said, and the young man flinched. "You laughed. You mocked. You whispered as I passed like I couldn't hear you." He stared down at his hands, nodding weakly. "I'm sorry. I thought it was just a joke." "But it wasn't funny," Vanessa said quietly. "Not to me, and not to anyone who's ever been treated like they didn't belong in a place they had every right to be." Chloe, beside him, wiped her eyes. "I went along with it," she admitted softly. "I judged you before you even spoke." "I know," Vanessa replied. And that's why we're here. She paused, letting the silence linger again, letting it settle into their bones. Then, she continued, this dealership sells luxury vehicles. But luxury means nothing if it doesn't come with dignity. You can polish every car on the lot until it shines like glass. But if your culture is rotten, your brand means nothing. Alex, silent until now, nodded beside her. His expression was firm. Every single person in this room will undergo comprehensive training. That's not optional. You will learn how to treat people with fairness and empathy, regardless of how they dress, what they look like, or what you think they can afford. Vanessa's voice returned, calm but cutting. This isn't about punishment. It's about reflection, correction, culture. Because what happened today, this wasn't just one person's failure. It was a systemic issue, one I refused to let continue. She looked at them all now, one by one, no longer as the woman in a cotton dress, but as the owner, the leader, the one who had walked in quietly and now held the room with the sheer force of truth. The conference room felt like a confession booth now. Every employee sat with eyes downcast, no longer hiding behind their polished uniforms or practiced smiles. The gloss of Sterling Motors had dulled, and in its place was something raw, unfiltered humanity. Vanessa leaned back slightly, giving them space to breathe, to process. But her presence remained unshakable. Then, slowly the silence broke. It was Susan who spoke first. Her voice was hoarse, stripped of the crisp authority it once carried. I'm so sorry, she said, trembling. I judged you the moment you walked in. I saw what you were wearing and assumed everything else. I've done that before, more than I'd like to admit. Vanessa didn't respond immediately. She let Susan speak, not for herself, but for the room. I've been in this job for so long, I forgot what it means to listen, Susan continued. I got used to keeping people out, protecting the brand, the showroom. But today, her voice cracked. Today, I realized I've been protecting the wrong things. The others watched, stunned, as the woman who had been their immovable rock now shook with the weight of her own words. I'll participate in every training, she said firmly. I'll lead it if you want me to. I want to make this right. Not to keep my job, but because I need to be better than this. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice was steady, but no longer cold. Thank you, Susan. Owning our mistakes is the first step, but it's only the beginning. Then, one by one, the rest followed. Chloe, her eyes wet, said softly, I've worked here for 3 years and never once questioned how we treat people who don't look like buyers. I laughed because I thought it was harmless. But now I see how deep the harm goes. Brandon looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 30 minutes. I made jokes. I tried to be cool with the others. I didn't think I was hurting anyone, but I did. I made this place feel unwelcome. I'm ashamed. Tyler, the quiet one, spoke too. I just followed along. I thought staying silent meant I wasn't part of the problem, but I was. Silence is just as loud when someone's being pushed out. Vanessa nodded slowly, letting their words hang in the air, not as penance, but as truth. This, she said, is what accountability looks like. No one's asking you to be perfect, but you are expected to be aware, to treat every customer and every colleague as someone who belongs. Until that becomes instinct, this company won't grow. She stood up, not to end the meeting, but to make something clear. We don't need another brand built on status and exclusion. We need a team that sees the human being before the handbag, the person before the purchase. A quiet murmur of agreement passed through the room, not for show, but out of relief, as if someone had finally said what needed saying for years. As the final echoes of confessions filled the air, something shifted in the room. The tension hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed, from fear of consequences to fear of staying the same. Vanessa remained at the head of the table, still and centered, but inside she felt something stir. Not victory, not vindication, but responsibility. This was more than a dramatic unveiling. It was a cultural crossroads. She looked to Susan, no longer the gatekeeper, but a woman stripped bare of pride. Susan, she said gently, I believe in second chances. But I also believe second chances require work. Real, uncomfortable work. Susan nodded wordlessly, tears finally slipping down her cheeks. "I'm ready," she whispered. "Whatever it takes." Vanessa then turned her eyes to the rest of the staff. "This isn't just about what happened to me today. It's about what happens here every day, to people who don't match your expectations, who are quietly sized up the moment they walk through that door. It's about the customers who leave without saying a word, because they've already read the room." The staff said nothing, but their posture had changed. The silence wasn't defensive anymore, it was attentive. "Open," Vanessa continued. "Starting today, Sterling Motors is under new ownership. Not just on paper, but in purpose. We will be a place where respect isn't reserved for the polished, or the wealthy, or the familiar. It will be our default, our starting point." Alex, who had been silent beside her, finally spoke. His voice was clear and grounded. "We're launching a full retraining program. Mandatory for everyone, myself included. It will cover not just customer service, but unconscious bias, inclusive communication, and what it actually means to represent this brand." Vanessa nodded. "And that's just the beginning. From now on, I want us to stop hiding behind phrases like procedure and policy. Those are tools, not excuses." She stepped away from the table now, speaking directly to their hearts. "If you think professionalism means cold efficiency, you've missed the point. If you believe success means filtering people out until only the ideal client remains, then you don't understand this business, or the world we live in." Her voice warmed slightly. "But if you're willing to grow, to relearn how you see people, how you treat people, then you still have a place here. Not just as employees, but as change makers." She looked across the room and, for the first time that day, saw heads begin to rise. Not in defiance, but in readiness. Because when truth finally strips away the pretense, what remains is choice. And in that room, at that moment, they chose to begin again. The atmosphere inside the conference room had shifted. What once felt like a reckoning now hummed with something else: readiness. No one was smiling yet. No one dared. But there was a shared look in the eyes of the staff now. The look of people who understood they'd just been given a rare second chance. Vanessa stood tall at the front of the room, every movement calm and deliberate. She didn't need theatrics. Her truth had already spoken louder than any outburst could. "Let me be clear," she began. "What we build here next will not be easy. Culture is the hardest thing to change in any business, but it's also the most important. From this day forward, how we treat people will be the foundation of our brand." She scanned the room. Brandon, Chloe, Tyler, even Susan, still shaken but attentive, all of them listening with an intensity she hadn't seen when she first walked in. "You will greet every customer with respect. No assumptions, no shortcuts. If someone walks in wearing flip-flops or a three-piece suit, they will get the same treatment. Because here, we don't sell just luxury vehicles. We sell trust." Alex stepped beside her, taking his turn. "This isn't just a rebranding effort. This is a culture overhaul, and that starts with training. Every staff member will go through bias awareness training, inclusive service protocols, and communication development. And no, there will be no grandfather clauses or exceptions." A few staff members nodded, almost instinctively. The message was clear. No one was above this. Vanessa added, "You won't just sit through a video and check a box. You'll participate. You'll reflect. You'll be challenged. Some of it will be uncomfortable, because growth always is." She walked slowly past the conference table, her voice steady and warm now. "I don't expect perfection. What I do expect is effort, awareness, courage. The courage to admit when you've messed up. The courage to step in when someone else does. The courage to unlearn habits that were passed off as just business." She paused behind Susan, then rested her hand gently on the back of her chair. "Susan will be the first to go through the new program," Vanessa said softly. "Not as punishment, but as a leader, because how she shows up moving forward will set the tone for everyone else." Susan gave a small, shaking nod. The gesture was silent but powerful, a public acknowledgement that she had failed but was willing to rebuild. Vanessa looked back at the group. "Let this day be the line in the sand," she said. "Everything before it, we leave behind. Everything ahead, we build together." And then she posed the question that would define the road forward. Are you ready to change? It wasn't rhetorical. She waited. One by one, hands lifted. Not all at once. Not in unison. But gradually, with quiet resolve. Brandon's was first. Then Tyler. Then Chloe, with red-rimmed eyes but a steady nod. Even the technicians in the back who had said nothing until now slowly raised their hands. And finally, Susan. Both hands resting on the table. She met Vanessa's gaze and said, "Yes, I am." For the first time since Vanessa stepped into that showroom, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt clear. This wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the beginning of a transformation. The meeting had ended, but the silence that followed wasn't one of fear anymore. It was the silence that comes right before a storm clears, a quiet space where people finally start to see the damage and the possibility. As the staff slowly filed out of the conference room, none of them looked the same. Brandon walked slower than usual, shoulders no longer puffed with ego. Chloe's eyes were swollen, but her chin was lifted. Tyler kept glancing around the showroom like he was seeing it for the first time. Not the way it looked, but the way it felt, the way it excluded. Susan remained in her seat a moment longer. She wasn't looking for a way out. She was sitting in what she'd done. And in that stillness, Vanessa saw something rare: humility. Vanessa gave Susan a gentle nod and turned to Alex. "We're not done," she said. "This is just the start." They exited into the lobby together, where the showroom lights gleamed off polished chrome and leather. The same space that had once felt icy and judgmental now seemed paused, as if waiting to be rewritten. Vanessa stepped through it slowly. Her walk wasn't just a stroll, it was a statement. Every corner she passed felt changed. Every glance she exchanged with her team had weight, had recognition, had reckoning. She passed Chloe, who was rearranging the front desk, less out of necessity and more as a nervous gesture, like she needed to reset the energy. When their eyes met, Chloe whispered, "I'll do better. I swear." "You already started," Vanessa replied gently. Brandon was in the SUV section, flipping through a clipboard, not performing, but actually working. No swagger, no side eyes, just focus. Even Tyler, often the quietest of the team, approached another employee in the background and asked, "Hey, do you want help with those files?" A small thing, but different. The shift was small but real. Vanessa stepped near the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked out into the Scottsdale sun. The cars outside gleamed under the Arizona light, but this time they didn't feel like status symbols. They felt welcoming, accessible, honest. That's what she wanted. Not just polished steel, but a culture polished from the inside. Susan approached quietly behind her. She looked exhausted, but lighter, as if a layer of armor had finally been removed. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the second chance, but for stopping us before we got any worse." Vanessa turned to face her. No smile, just clarity. "You don't need to thank me, Susan. You need to show me. In your actions. In your choices. Starting now." Susan nodded. "You'll see." Vanessa looked around once more. This showroom would never be the same. Not because of a scandal or a viral moment, but because the team had faced something they never expected to. The truth about themselves. And truth, when faced with courage, is where real transformation begins. 2 weeks had passed since the storm that shook Sterling Motors. But this wasn't a company trying to weather a scandal. This was a team learning to rebuild from the inside out, and it showed. Vanessa returned to the dealership that Monday, not as a mystery guest, not as the woman in the cotton dress, but as the leader. She wore a tailored suit this time, navy blue, crisp, elegant, but it wasn't about appearances. It was about being seen, this time as her whole self. Susan greeted her at the front door, not with a stiff handshake or forced smile, but a quiet, genuine welcome. "Morning, Miss Morgan," she said with a small nod. "Staff meeting room is already set up." Vanessa smiled. "Call me Vanessa." That moment, subtle as it was, marked a turning point. Respect without fear. Structure without pride. Leadership without ego. Inside the dealership, change was already blooming in ways that couldn't be measured by numbers. Yet, Chloe had rewritten the greeting script at the reception desk. No more, "Are you here for an appointment?" as a coded barrier. Now it was simple, friendly, and open. Welcome to Sterling Motors. What can we help you explore today? Brandon had signed up for not one, but two of the bias awareness seminars. Not because it was required, but because he finally admitted to himself that he needed it, that he didn't want to be that guy again. Tyler had begun to shadow Susan voluntarily to learn how to better lead without repeating her mistakes. And Susan, for her part, didn't dodge the uncomfortable moments anymore. If someone asked her what happened that day, she didn't hide it. I misjudged someone, she'd say, but I'm learning. The transparency was new. It was difficult, but it was real. Vanessa watched all of it unfold, not as a distant owner, but as a present leader. She hosted a roundtable that week, not a top-down meeting, but a conversation, a chance for every employee to speak, to be heard, and to bring their ideas for improving not just sales, but culture. Some were small things, changing how name tags looked so everyone felt less like a number, swapping out outdated premium signage that subtly suggested exclusivity, updating the break room with photos of staff members, not stock luxury imagery, humanizing the space. But the biggest change? Every Saturday, a different employee now rotated as customer experience captain. Not the manager, not the sales leader, just someone tasked with ensuring that every guest who walked in felt welcome, seen, and respected. It wasn't about hierarchy anymore. It was about humanity. Vanessa knew they still had a long road ahead. Some habits wouldn't die quickly. Some people would need reminders. Some customers might still come in with expectations that didn't match the new mission. But for the first time since she acquired Sterling Motors, she didn't feel like she was fixing something broken. She felt like she was growing something worth protecting. 1 month had passed since Vanessa Morgan walked into Sterling Motors in a cotton dress and changed everything. The dealership hadn't just shifted, it had evolved. There was no grand ribbon cutting, no press conference, no viral video proclaiming a new era. The transformation at Sterling Motors happened in the quiet moments, in the daily decisions, in the small, conscious choices to unlearn and rebuild. And that, Vanessa thought, was exactly the point. One Friday afternoon, she stood by the same window where she'd once watched Susan try to block her path to a black coupe. The same window where she'd stood as an outsider in her own business. Today, she stood there as something else entirely. The heartbeat of the place. Behind her, laughter bubbled from the break room. Not the derisive kind she had heard that first day, but the genuine camaraderie of people working through change together. Brandon and Chloe were comparing notes on how to handle difficult customers without assumptions. Susan was coaching 2 interns patiently and without judgment. Tyler had started mentoring younger staff on inclusion and leadership. No one was perfect, but no one was pretending anymore either. And that was where real growth started. Vanessa stepped into the showroom again, her heels quiet on the tile. She passed by a couple browsing a mid-range sedan, an interracial couple with a toddler on one hip. A few months ago, they might have been ignored or talked down to. Today, they were surrounded by warmth, clear answers, and, most importantly, respect. As Vanessa passed, the husband nodded toward her. "Hey, are you the owner?" She smiled. "I am. Beautiful place. The vibe in here, it's different from any other dealership we've been to. In a good way." Vanessa nodded. "That's exactly what we're going for." He smiled back and turned to the car again. And just like that, Vanessa felt it, that deep, satisfying click that comes when everything you've built finally lines up. Not just the strategy, not just the business, but the heart. She moved toward the center of the showroom, pausing by that same black coupe, the one that weeks ago had been the symbol of exclusion. Now, it stood surrounded by light, not as an untouchable shrine to luxury, but as an example of how accessibility and aspiration could exist side by side. Susan approached quietly, holding a new file in her hand. "Here's the weekly report," she said. "We're getting more first-time buyers than ever before. And the reviews," she paused, smiling with genuine pride. "They don't just talk about the cars anymore. They talk about how they were treated." Vanessa took the file, nodding slowly. "That's how we win," she said. "Not by selling the most, by serving the best." Susan glanced around. "I still have a lot to learn, but I want you to know I'm all in." I know you are, Vanessa replied, and I'll be here every step of the way. As sunlight poured through the windows, warming the steel and glass showroom, Vanessa looked out once more, not as someone seeking validation, but as a woman who knew her worth and had taught others to see it too. Sterling Motors was no longer just a dealership. It was a story, a statement, a legacy in motion. And in the years to come, long after titles faded and trends changed, what would endure wasn't the day she revealed herself as CEO. It was the day she walked in like she was no one and proved that dignity doesn't need to announce itself. It just walks tall and lets the world catch up. Follow for more. Stories like this deserve to be heard. If it touched you, please like, subscribe, and stay with us for the journey ahead. Thank you for watching.